The CEO's voice echoed across the marble lobby like a gunshot. "You, security guard. Walter, is it? Pack your things. You're done." The old man at the front desk looked up slowly. His hands, scarred across the knuckles in ways that suggested they had done things no corporate executive could imagine, remained perfectly still on the visitor log. What Preston Hargrove III did not know, what no one in that building knew, was that in exactly 43 minutes, he would be begging this old man for his job. The lobby of Meridian Defense Technologies gleamed with the kind of cold perfection that only money could buy. Christmas Eve afternoon light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across Italian marble floors. A 20-foot tree stood in the corner, decorated with silver and blue ornaments that matched the company colors. Soft holiday music played from hidden speakers, a cruel soundtrack to what was about to unfold. Preston Hargrove III stood in the center of the lobby like a man who had never been told no in his entire life. 44 years old, Ivy League educated, appointed CEO 3 months ago with a mandate to cut costs and boost quarterly profits. His suit cost more than most employees made in a month. His watch cost more than most made in a year. And his contempt for the elderly security guard standing before him was written across his face like a headline. "You heard me," Preston continued, his voice rising to ensure the skeleton crew of Christmas Eve employees could hear every word. "I want you out. Today. Now. You're part of the old Meridian, Walter. The Meridian that looked like a retirement home instead of a defense contractor." He gestured at Walter's ill-fitting uniform, the worn boots held together with electrical tape. "Look at yourself. We have a Pentagon delegation arriving in 20 minutes. You think they want to see this?" Walter Crenshaw stood slowly from behind the security desk. 71 years old, weathered face mapped with lines that told stories no one had ever asked to hear. His movements were precise, economical, the kind of efficiency that came from decades of training most people could not imagine. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "I understand, sir. If you're watching the story right now, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below with your city or country. And if you have ever witnessed someone powerful mistreat someone they assumed was beneath them, stay with us. Because what happens next in this lobby will remind you that appearances can be the most dangerous lies of all." Preston's lip curled. "That's it? That's all you have to say? No argument? No sob story about your years of service?" He turned to address the small crowd of employees who had stopped to watch, their faces a mixture of horror and helplessness. "This is what accountability looks like, people. This is the new Meridian. No dead weight. No charity cases." Walter began removing his badge, the laminated card with his photograph and the word security printed beneath it. His fingers moved with that same strange precision, unhurried despite the humiliation being heaped upon him. The badge had been his identity for 6 years. Not Walter Crenshaw, former anything. Just Walter, the night security guard who arrived at 5 every morning and knew every cleaning staff member's name. "I will need your jacket too," Preston said, stepping closer. "That's company property. The Meridian logo on the breast pocket. Can't have you walking around representing us after today." A flicker of something passed across Walter's face. Not anger. Something deeper. Something older. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate Preston more than any argument could have. "Of course, sir." He began to unzip the jacket, revealing a faded gray thermal beneath, and something else. On his forearm, partially visible where his sleeve had ridden up, there was a tattoo. Dark ink against weathered skin. An anchor. Coordinates. Numbers that meant nothing to anyone watching. Except they meant everything. The lobby doors opened with a whisper of cold December air. For figures entered, their bearing immediately marking them as military despite their civilian clothes. At their head walked a woman in her late 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, her posture ramrod straight. For stars glinted on the lapel pin she wore. Admiral Catherine Shun, head of Naval Special Warfare Command, leading the Pentagon delegation that would decide the fate of a $2.3 billion contract. Her eyes swept the lobby, taking in the scene with the assessment speed of someone who had spent 30 years making split-second decisions. The humiliated old man removing his jacket, the preening executive enjoying his power, the frozen employees afraid to intervene, and something else, something that made her step falter almost imperceptibly. The tattoo on the old man's forearm. She had seen coordinates like that before, in classified briefings, in memorial halls, on the arms of men who had done things that would never appear in any official record. Admiral Chun, Preston's voice transformed instantly, oozing charm as he turned away from Walter. "Welcome to Meridian Defense Technologies. I apologize for the small disturbance. Just handling some personnel matters before your tour." He shot a look at Walter. "The service entrance is through the back. Make sure no one sees you leave." Walter nodded once, jacket now folded over his arm, badge placed carefully on the security desk. He turned toward the service corridor, and as he did, his sleeve shifted again. Admiral Chen's coffee cup, halfway to her lips, froze in midair. She saw the full tattoo now, not just an anchor, a trident, the coordinates of places that did not officially exist, and 3 letters beneath them, RGO. Her breath caught. Preston was still talking, gesturing toward the conference room, explaining the agenda for the contract discussion. He did not notice that Admiral Chun was no longer listening. He did not notice that her eyes had followed the old security guard until he disappeared around the corner. He did not notice her hand reaching for her phone, or the text she sent with trembling fingers to a number very few people in the world possessed. And he certainly did not notice the 2 words she typed. Spectre, alive? The lobby returned to its manufactured calm. Christmas music continued to play. The Pentagon delegation followed Preston toward the elevators. And somewhere in the service corridor, Walter Crenshaw walked toward what he thought was the end of everything, unaware that in exactly 37 minutes, his past would finally catch up with him. But this time, it would not come as an enemy. This time, it would come as the truth. The weight of the badge leaving his hand triggered something Walter had spent 6 years trying to bury. Memory did not ask permission. It simply arrived, dragging him backward through decades like a riptide pulling a swimmer out to sea. 1987. A younger Walter Crenshaw stood at attention in a room that did not officially exist, inside a building that appeared on no map. The Secretary of the Navy himself pinned the Navy Cross to his chest, while cameras that would never release their footage recorded the moment. For actions above and beyond the call of duty during Operation Urgent Fury and subsequent classified operations in the Caribbean theater. The citation would remain sealed for 40 years. The men he had saved would never be able to thank him publicly. And Walter, 23 years old with eyes that had already seen too much, simply nodded once and returned to his seat. That was the beginning. By 1991, Walter had completed 11 deployments, earned 2 more Bronze Stars, and watched 17 of his closest friends come home in flag-draped coffins. His body was a roadmap of near misses. Shrapnel scars across his ribs. A bullet grazed along his left temple that still throbbed when the weather changed. Hands that had done things in service of his country that would haunt him until the day he died. But it was not the violence that broke him. It was the love. Eleanor Marie Crenshaw, née Sullivan, had waited for him through every deployment. She was a Navy nurse when they met, a woman who understood the weight of service without needing it explained. She had held him through the nightmares, talked him down from the dark places, given him 2 sons who looked at him like he hung the moon. Marcus and Daniel, born 18 months apart, raised on Navy bases around the world, taught to be proud of their father without ever fully understanding what he did. When Walter left active duty in 1991, Eleanor had cried with relief. No more waiting. No more wondering if this deployment would be the last. They settled in Northern Virginia, and Walter did what his best friend Raymond had told him to do with his dying breath. He built something. Meridian Defense Technologies started in a garage with 4 former SEALs and a shared conviction that the men and women serving overseas deserved better equipment than bureaucracy was providing. Walter understood what operators needed because he had been one. He knew which gear failed in the sand, which communications systems died in the humidity, which targeting solutions cost lives instead of saving them. Within 5 years, Meridian held 12 patents. Within 10, they were a major defense contractor. Within 20, Walter Crenshaw Holloway, he had taken Eleanor's family name to separate his business identity from his service record, was worth more than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But he never forgot where he came from. The foundation came first. Eleanor's promise, named for the woman who had promised to love him through anything and kept that promise for 34 years. It started small, housing homeless veterans in the D.C. area, helping them find jobs, giving them back their dignity. By the time Eleanor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2018, the foundation had served over 1,000 men and women who had been forgotten by the country they served. She died on a Tuesday in March. Walter held her hand as she slipped away, and something inside him shattered so completely he was not sure it would ever be whole again. The boys were grown by then. Marcus was 32, a prosecutor in Richmond with a wife and a daughter on the way. Daniel was 29, an engineer who had inherited his father's gift for solving impossible problems. They stood beside Walter at the funeral, tall and strong, wearing their grief with the same quiet dignity their father had taught them. And then Walter ran. He could not look at them. Every time he saw Marcus's jaw, he saw Eleanor's father. Every time Daniel laughed, he heard her laugh beneath it. The house they had shared for 20 years became a mausoleum, every room haunted by her absence. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped answering the phone when his sons called. The letter he left was 3 sentences long. I love you both more than you will ever know. I am sorry. Please do not look for me. He signed over visible control of Meridian to a board of directors, buried his controlling interest in a blind trust managed by his attorney Margaret Sullivan, and disappeared. The man who had built a billion-dollar company took a security guard job at his own headquarters under a shortened version of his name. Nobody connected Walter the Night Guard with W.C. Holloway, the reclusive majority shareholder. Nobody looked twice at the old man who arrived at 5 every morning and left after the executives went home. That was how Walter wanted it. For 6 years, he existed in the shadows of his own creation. He watched young veterans get hired through the programs he had secretly funded. He nodded politely to executives who had no idea they worked for him. He ate lunch alone in the break room and listened to employees complain about decisions he could have overturned with a single phone call. And every night, before his shift ended, he walked to the memorial wall on the 3rd floor. 17 names engraved in brass. His teammates, his brothers, the men who had not come home. He would stand there in the darkness, fingers tracing the letters of Raymond Ghost Okonkwo's name, and whisper the same words he had whispered for 30 years. Still here, brother. Still trying. The service corridor was cold. Walter walked slowly, jacket folded over his arm, toward the exit that would take him out of the building he had built, away from the company that bore his fingerprints in every innovation, out of the life he had constructed from the ruins of his grief. His hand found his wallet. Inside, worn soft at the edges, was the photograph he carried everywhere. Eleanor on their wedding day, young and radiant, laughing at something he had said. And beside her image, tucked into the same plastic sleeve, a smaller photo. Marcus and Daniel at ages 8 and 6, sitting on Walter's lap, wearing matching navy t-shirts their mother had bought them. He had not seen his sons in 6 years. He knew from Margaret's quarterly reports that Marcus was now a judge, that Daniel had started his own engineering firm, that there were 3 grandchildren who had never met their grandfather. He knew they had hired private investigators. He knew they had never stopped searching. But he also knew, with the certainty of a man who had spent his life making impossible choices, that they were better off without him. He had given them everything he could while Eleanor was alive. His presence now would only remind them of what they had lost. The exit door loomed ahead, gray steel marked with a glowing red sign. Walter's hand reached for the handle, and then he stopped, because somewhere behind him, echoing down the service corridor, he heard a voice say a word that no one had spoken to him in 30 years. Spectre? Walter's blood turned to ice. His hand froze on the door handle. That voice, young, male, trembling with something between disbelief and awe. He turned slowly, knowing that whatever happened next, the life he had built from silence and shadows was about to end. A young security guard stood at the far end of the corridor. Tommy Reeves, 26 years old, former Army Ranger, hired through the veteran program Walter had secretly funded. His face was pale. His phone was clutched in his hand, screen glowing with an image that Walter recognized even from this distance. A photograph from 1987. A young man receiving a medal in a room that did not exist. The same face that now stared back at Tommy from beneath 30 years of weathering and grief. "Sir," Tommy's voice cracked. "Is it you?" The name hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Spectre, a call sign that had been whispered in special operations circles for decades. A ghost story told to young operators about a man who could disappear into any environment, complete any mission, and vanish without a trace. Walter's voice came out rough and used as speaking more than necessary. "Nobody has called me that in a very long time." Tommy Reeves took a step forward, then stopped, as if approaching a wild animal he did not want to spook. His hand was shaking. The phone screen still glowed with that decades-old photograph. A young Walter Crenshaw receiving honors that would remain classified for generations. "Sir, I served with 2nd Battalion Rangers. Fort Benning. We studied your operations. Every special operations candidate studies your operations. The Mogadishu rescue. The extraction in Grenada. The thing in Kabul that nobody's allowed to talk about." Walter said nothing. His hand had fallen away from the exit door, but his body remained coiled, ready to move in any direction. Tommy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They told us you were dead. Killed in 1997, somewhere in South America. Classified operation. No body recovered. There's a star on the wall at Langley with your name behind it. Reports of my death," Walter said quietly, "were greatly exaggerated." Before Tommy could respond, footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Both men turned as Preston Hargrove's voice preceded him around the corner, sharp with irritation. "Reeves, where did the old man go? I told him to use the service entrance, not loiter in the hallways. The Pentagon people are asking about security protocols, and I will not have them seeing that embarrassment anywhere near the building." Preston rounded the corner and stopped short at the sight of Tommy and Walter facing each other in the dim service corridor. His face cycled through confusion, annoyance, and finally settled on cold authority. "What is this? A retirement party?" He turned to Walter with undisguised contempt. "I thought I made myself clear. Out. Now. Or do I need to call actual security to remove you from the premises?" Tommy stepped forward. "Mr. Hargrove, sir, I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding here." Preston's eyes narrowed. "Misunderstanding? The only thing I misunderstood was how long it would take to clear out the dead weight from this company." He gestured at Walter like he was pointing at a piece of furniture that needed to be discarded. "Look at him, Reeves. This is what failure looks like. This is what happens when people give up on themselves and expect the rest of us to carry them." He paused, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "I'm sure he has some colorful story about those scars. Everyone does these days. Probably bought those dog tags at an army surplus store for $5. The words landed like physical blows, but Walter did not flinch. His posture remained unchanged, that strange military stillness that Tommy recognized from men who had seen and done things beyond normal comprehension. He simply waited, watching Preston with eyes that gave nothing away. Preston took the silence as submission. He stepped closer to Walter, emboldened by the lack of resistance. "You know what I think? I think you are exactly what you look like. A washed-up old man who could not make it in the real world. So you took a job any teenager could do and convinced yourself it was dignity." He reached out and flicked the folded jacket in Walter's arms. "I want a thermal too. Company issued. Everything Meridian goes back to Meridian." "Sir," Tommy tried again, his voice strained. "You really need to stop." Preston whirled on him. "Excuse me? Are you telling me how to run my company?" Tommy's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, I do not think you understand who you're talking to." "I understand perfectly." Preston's voice rose, theatrical now, playing to an audience even though only 3 people stood in that corridor. I'm talking to a 70-year-old security guard who could not even afford boots that do not fall apart. I'm talking to a man whose entire contribution to this company was sitting behind a desk and signing people in. I'm talking to someone who should be thanking me for letting him keep his dignity this long instead of standing here wasting my time on Christmas Eve. He grabbed Walter's arm, intending to physically turn him toward the exit. And that was when everything changed. The sleeve of Walter's thermal rode up as Preston's fingers closed around his forearm. The full tattoo was exposed now, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lighting of the service corridor. Not just an anchor, not just a trident. 5 sets of coordinates, inked in precise military notation. 5 dates spanning 3 decades. A cluster of initials beneath them: RGO, TMS, JPK, DRH, WCS. And woven through it all, 2 names in smaller script that only someone looking closely would notice. Marcus. Daniel. Tommy's breath caught. He knew what those coordinates meant. Every special operations soldier knew. They were the locations where brothers had fallen, the dates they died, the initials of men who would never come home. Preston saw none of it. His eyes were fixed on Walter's face, waiting for submission, waiting for the broken apology he expected from everyone he deemed beneath him. What he got instead was silence. And in that silence, Tommy Reeves made a decision. He pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. He found the article he had been reading, the Wikipedia page, the declassified portions of operations that had become legend. And then he found something else, a connection he had not made until this moment, standing in this corridor, watching a Titan being humiliated by a man who had never sacrificed anything. Wojciech Holloway, the reclusive majority shareholder of Meridian Defense Technologies, the man whose signature appeared on every major contract, but who had never once shown his face at a company event. The man who, according to corporate records, had founded the company in 1991 with 3 other veterans. Walter Crenshaw, Navy Cross recipient, 1987. Silver Star, 1989. Bronze Stars in 1988, 1990, and 1993. Left active duty in 1991 to start a defense consulting firm. The dates matched. The timeline matched. The initials matched. Tommy looked up from his phone, his face drained of color. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, his voice barely controlled. "Take your hand off that man. Right now." Preston laughed. "Or what? You will defend his honor? He is a security guard, Reeves. He is nobody." Tommy's response was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "No, sir. He's the man who owns this company." The words echoed in the corridor. Preston's hand froze on Walter's arm. His smile faltered, confusion bleeding through the arrogance. "What did you say?" Tommy held up his phone, screen facing outward. The photograph from 1987. The Wikipedia article. The corporate records he had pulled up in seconds. Walter Crenshaw Holloway, Tommy said. Call sign Spectre. Founder and majority shareholder of Meridian Defense Technologies. The man whose signature you need to close that $2 billion contract. He paused, letting the words sink in. The man you just fired on Christmas Eve. Preston's face went white. His hand fell away from Walter's arm as if it had been burned. And in the silence that followed, Walter Crenshaw finally spoke. "Let go, son." His voice was tired, heavy with decades of things he had never said. It does not matter anymore. But even as he spoke the words, they all knew it was too late. The truth, buried for 6 years beneath grief and anonymity, had finally clawed its way into the light. And it was about to change everything. The corridor seemed to shrink around them, the fluorescent lights humming a nervous frequency that matched the tension crackling in the air. Preston Hargrove stood frozen, his mind visibly struggling to reconcile the impossible information Tommy had just delivered. His mouth opened and closed twice before any sound emerged. "This is absurd," he finally managed. W.C. Holloway is a reclusive billionaire. He operates through attorneys. Nobody has ever seen him. He gestured at Walter with a hand that had begun to tremble. "This man is a security guard. He cannot even afford proper boots." Walter said nothing. His eyes had gone somewhere else, somewhere far away from this corridor and this confrontation. The mention of his full name had triggered something, a door he had kept locked for 30 years swinging open against his will. Mogadishu, October 3rd, 1993. The memory crashed over him like a wave he could not outrun. He was not standing in a corporate service corridor anymore. He was crouched behind the burning wreckage of a Black Hawk helicopter, rounds snapping overhead, the screams of wounded men cutting through the chaos like razors through silk. Raymond Okonkwo was beside him. Chief Petty Officer Raymond Ghost Okonkwo, the best spotter Walter had ever worked with, the man who had saved his life 11 times across 4 continents. They had been friends since BUD/S, brothers in every way that mattered. Raymond's wife had just given birth to their first child, a daughter named Grace who Raymond had only seen in photographs. "We have to move," Raymond shouted over the gunfire. "Extraction point is 8 blocks north. We stay here, we die here." Walter nodded, checking his ammunition. 19 men. They had to get 19 wounded and scattered men through 8 blocks of hostile territory, with half the city trying to kill them. The odds are not good. The odds had never been good. They moved. Walter took point, Raymond covering their 6. Block by block, doorway by doorway, they gathered survivors and pushed north. Walter's rifle grew hot in his hands. His muscles burned. His mind narrowed to a single point of focus. Keep moving, keep shooting, keep the men behind him alive. They were 2 blocks from extraction when the RPG came. Walter never saw where it launched from. One moment they were advancing through a narrow alley. The next moment Raymond was shoving him sideways with all his strength. The explosion turned the world white, then red, then black. When Walter's vision cleared, he was lying against a crumbling wall. His ears rang with a sound like 1,000 bells. And Raymond was on the ground beside him, his body torn open by shrapnel that had been meant for Walter. "No." Walter crawled to his friend, hands pressing uselessly against wounds that could not be closed. "No, no, no. Raymond, stay with me. Stay with me, brother." Raymond's eyes found his. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth when he tried to smile. "Not your fault, Spectre." His voice was barely a whisper. "Never your fault. Do not talk. Save your strength. Extraction is close. We're almost there." Raymond's hand found Walter's, gripping with the last of his strength. "Build something." His breath rattled. "Make it mean something. Promise me." "I promise." Tears cut tracks through the grime and blood on Walter's face. "I promise, Raymond. Isuertugu, I promisa." "Tell Grace." Raymond's eyes were fading, the light in them dimming like a sunset surrendering to night. "Tell her Daddy loved her. Tell her." The grip on Walter's hand went slack. The light went out, and Raymond Ghost Okonkwo, age 29, died in a nameless alley in Mogadishu, 90 seconds before the extraction helicopters arrived. Walter carried his body 3 miles to the landing zone. He would not leave him. He could not leave him. When they finally pried Raymond from his arms, Walter had to be sedated. He woke up 2 days later in a hospital in Germany with 17 lives saved and 1 loss that would haunt him forever. The corridors swam back into focus. Walter blinked, surprised to find moisture on his cheeks. His hand had moved unconsciously to his forearm, fingers tracing the initials inked there. Ergio Raymond Gregory Okonkwo, the first name on a list that had grown too long over the years. Preston was still talking, his voice shrill with denial. "I want proof. I want documentation. Anyone can claim to be someone they are not." His eyes darted between Walter and Tommy, searching for the crack in the story that would let him escape the consequences of what he had done. Tommy's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face shifted into something Walter recognized. The expression of a soldier receiving orders. "Sir," Tommy said slowly, looking at Walter, "there is someone here to see you. Admiral Chun. She is in the main lobby. She says she needs to speak with you immediately." Walter's jaw tightened. The Admiral. The text she had sent. Spectre. Alive? The past was not just catching up to him. It was surrounding him, cutting off every avenue of retreat. "I do not know any Admiral Chun," Preston interjected, his voice climbing toward hysteria. And I do not know what game you two are playing, but I'm the CEO of this company. I make the decisions here, not some security guard with a sad story and a few tattoos. Walter turned to face him. For the first time since the confrontation began, something shifted in his bearing. The tired old man in the ill-fitting uniform seemed to grow taller, his shoulders squaring, his spine straightening. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The security guard was disappearing, and something else was taking his place. "You want proof?" Walter said quietly. His voice had changed too, carrying an authority that had nothing to do with corporate titles or organizational charts. It was the voice of a man who had commanded other men in the worst places on earth, who had made life and death decisions while bullets flew and brothers fell. "Fine, let us go see the Admiral, and then we will discuss exactly who makes decisions around here." He walked past Preston without another glance, moving toward the main corridor with that precise, economical stride. Tommy fell in a step behind him, phone still clutched in his hand. Preston stood alone in the service corridor for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to catalog. Then, with the desperate energy of a man watching his world crumble, he hurried after them. The lobby was waiting. The Admiral was waiting. And the truth that Walter had buried for 6 years was about to rise from its grave. There would be no more hiding after today. The lobby had transformed in the 20 minutes since Walter had been marched toward the service exit. Word travels fast in any organization, but it travels fastest when something unprecedented is happening. Employees who had been heading home for Christmas Eve had stopped, gathered, whispered. The skeleton crew had swelled to nearly 30 people, clustered in small groups around the marble expanse, pretending to check phones or finish conversations while their eyes tracked the corridor entrance. Admiral Catherine Shun stood apart from her delegation, positioned near the massive Christmas tree like a sentinel awaiting a returning soldier. Her posture had not changed, that rigid military bearing that announced her rank before any insignia could. But her eyes, those had changed. They held something Walter recognized from decades of service. The look of someone who had just received intelligence that rewrote everything they thought they knew. The corridor door opened. Walter emerged first, followed by Tommy Reeves, followed by a visibly shaken Preston Hargrove. The whispers in the lobby died instantly, replaced by a silence so complete that the soft Christmas music seemed suddenly loud. Admiral Chun moved before anyone else could react. She crossed the lobby with quick, purposeful strides, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. She stopped 3 feet from Walter, her eyes studying his face with an intensity that made the watching employees hold their breath. "Master Chief Holloway," she said. The title hung in the air, foreign to everyone except the two of them. Her voice carried just enough to reach the nearest observers. "I apologize for not recognizing you immediately. It has been a long time since anyone saw your face." Walter's expression remained unreadable. "You knew my father, Admiral?" A flicker of something crossed her face. Respect, perhaps, or admiration for the deflection. "I knew of him. Every operator in Naval Special Warfare knows of him." She paused. "I also know that the star on the wall at Langley has been there for 27 years. Honoring a man who supposedly died in 1997. Preston pushed forward, his voice cracking with desperation. "Admiral Chun, I can explain. There has been some confusion. This man is a security guard. He was terminated today for performance issues. Whatever he has told you, whatever claims he has made, I assure you they are completely unfounded." The Admiral did not even glance at him. Her eyes remained fixed on Walter. "Is that true, Master Chief? Are you just a security guard?" For a long moment, Walter said nothing. His gaze drifted across the lobby, taking in the watching employees, the Pentagon delegation, the Christmas tree glittering with ornaments that cost more than his monthly salary. 6 years of anonymity. 6 years of penance. 6 years of trying to disappear from a world that would not let him go. He said finally. His voice was quiet, but it carried. For 6 years, that is exactly what I was. And before that, Walter's hand moved unconsciously to his forearm, to the coordinates and names inked into his skin. Before that, I was someone else. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. She reached into her jacket and withdrew her phone, turning the screen to face him. I made some calls while you were in the corridor. Pulled some files that require my clearance level to access. She held the phone closer, showing him an image. Would you like to tell me about Operation Crimson Tide? February 1996? Because according to these records, you led a 6-man team into a location I am not allowed to name, extracted an asset I'm not allowed to identify, and lost 2 men whose names are still classified. The lobby seemed to contract around them. Even Preston had gone silent, his face pale as he began to understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. Walter looked at the phone screen. The image showed a younger version of himself, dressed in combat gear, standing with 5 other men in front of a helicopter that bore no markings. 2 of those men were now names on his arm. 2 more were buried in Arlington. Only Walter and 1 other had survived, and the other had taken his own life in 2003. Those men deserved better than they got, Walter said quietly. They all did. Admiral Chun lowered the phone. The room remained frozen, everyone straining to hear. Master Chief, I have to ask you directly. Are you Walter Crenshaw Holloway, call sign Spectre, founder of Meridian Defense Technologies? The man whose signature we need to close a $2.3 billion defense contract? Walter was silent for a long moment. His eyes found Tommy Reeves, standing at the edge of the crowd with tears streaming down his face. They found Preston Hargrove, whose arrogance had crumbled into something that looked like terror. They found the employees who had watched him be humiliated, who had said nothing, who were now witnessing something none of them would ever forget. And finally, his eyes found the window, where snow had begun to fall on Christmas Eve, soft and white and silent. Yes, he said. The word fell like a stone into still water. I am. The reaction rippled through the lobby in waves. Gasps. Whispered exclamations. One woman pressed her hand to her mouth. A man in a suit stumbled backward, as if physically pushed. Admiral Chen's expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened. She reached out and took Walter's hand, not in a handshake, but in something more personal. A gesture of connection between 2 people who understood things civilians never would. Welcome back, Master Chief, she said quietly. We thought we had lost you. Walter looked down at their joined hands. The Admiral's grip was firm and warm. It was the first human touch that felt like kindness in longer than he could remember. You did lose me, he said. For a while. His voice caught just slightly. I lost myself. From behind them came a sound that cut through the moment like broken glass. Preston Hargrove, his voice strangled with panic. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. I do not care who he claims to be. I am a CEO. The board appointed me. I have authority here. Admiral Chun released Walter's hand and turned slowly to face Preston. Her expression had shifted into something cold, something dangerous. Mr. Hargrove, she said, her voice carrying the full weight of 4 stars and 30 years of command. I watched you humiliate this man in front of your employees. I watched you mock his service. I watched you put your hands on a decorated combat veteran and demand he remove his clothing in public. She stepped closer, and Preston visibly flinched. Do you understand what you have done? Preston's mouth worked soundlessly. His eyes darted around the lobby, searching for an ally, finding none. And from the main entrance, the lobby doors swung open again. A woman entered, silver-haired and sharpied, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it contained the weight of empires. Margaret Sullivan had arrived, and she was not alone. Behind her walked 2 men in dark suits, their bearing unmistakably legal, their expressions unmistakably grim. They moved like people who had come to deliver judgment. Walter, Margaret called across the lobby, her voice cutting through the chaos. I brought the documentation. All of it. She paused, her eyes finding Preston with something that looked almost like pity. And I brought witnesses. The trap was closing, and Preston Hargrove was standing directly in its center. Margaret Sullivan moved through the lobby like a warship cutting through calm waters. At 68 years old, she carried herself with the authority of someone who had spent 4 decades in courtrooms and boardrooms, dismantling the unprepared with surgical precision. Her eyes found Walter immediately, and something in her expression shifted. Relief, perhaps, or the grim satisfaction of a plan finally reaching its conclusion. "Walter," she said, stopping before him, "I told you this day would come. I told you 6 years ago that you could not hide forever." Walter's voice was low. "I was not hiding, Margaret. I was disappearing. There's a difference. Not anymore." She turned to face the gathered crowd, her voice rising to fill the marble space. "My name is Margaret Sullivan. I am the legal representative for W.C. Holloway, the majority shareholder of Meridian Defense Technologies." She paused, letting the words settle. "I'm also the only person outside of federal intelligence agencies who knows the full scope of Mr. Holloway's service record and business holdings." She opened her briefcase on the security desk where Walter had sat for 6 years, spreading documents across its surface with practiced efficiency. The two men who had entered with her positioned themselves on either side, their presence adding weight to every paper she revealed. "Certificate of Incorporation," Margaret announced, holding up the first document. "Meridian Defense Technologies, founded March 1991. Signatories include Walter Crenshaw Holloway, Raymond Gregory Okonkwo, Thomas Michael Sterling, and James Patrick Kennedy." Tommy Reeves inhaled sharply. Those initials, Edgio, Temis, Yotpeka, the names on Walter's arm. The founders of Meridian were the men he had served with, the men who had died. Margaret continued, relentless. "Stock distribution certificates showing 51% ownership retained by W.C. Holloway through a blind trust established in 2019. Board resolution from the same year accepting Mr. Holloway's request for anonymous operational status. Quarterly signature verifications confirming Mr. Holloway's continued oversight of major corporate decisions." She looked up, her gaze finding Preston with cold precision. "Including the decision to hire you, Mr. Hargrove. A decision that Mr. Holloway opposed, I might add, but was outvoted on by the board members who did not know they were contradicting the majority shareholder." Preston's face had gone the color of old paper. "This cannot be happening," he whispered. "This is not possible." "Oh, it is very possible." Margaret pulled out another document, this one bearing official government seals. "This is a letter of commendation from the Secretary of Defense, dated 2015, thanking Mr. Holloway for his contributions to military technology that have saved, and I quote, countless American lives in theaters of operation worldwide." She set it down and retrieved another. "This is the Charter for Eleanor's Promise, a foundation Mr. Holloway established in his late wife's name. It has provided housing, employment assistance, and mental health services to over 5,000 homeless veterans in the past decade." The Admiral stepped forward, her eyes scanning the documents. "Margaret," she said quietly, "how long have you known he was working here? As a security guard?" "Since the day he applied for the position." Margaret's voice softened slightly. "I tried to talk him out of it. Told him he was punishing himself for something that was not his fault. But Walter has always been stubborn." She glanced at him with something like affection. "He said he needed to be useful. Said he could not sit in an empty house anymore. Said the company needed someone watching over it who actually cared." Walter's jaw tightened. "Margaret." She ignored him. "So I let him have his anonymity. I handled the paperwork to keep his identity separate from his employment records. I watched from a distance as he arrived at 5 every morning, walked the halls of the company he built, and left after everyone else went home." She paused. "I watched him become invisible in his own creation." The lobby had gone completely still. Even the Christmas music seemed to have faded, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Preston made one last desperate attempt. "Even if all of this is true, even if he does own the company, he violated employment protocols. He concealed his identity. He falsified his application. I had every right to terminate him based on company policy." Margaret's smile was thin and sharp as a blade. "Actually, Mr. Hargrove, the employment application he submitted was entirely accurate. He listed his legal name as Walter Crenshaw, which is correct. He listed his previous employment as self-employed, which is also correct. He disclosed his military service as Navy, retired, which is technically accurate. She tilted her head. The fact that you never bothered to conduct a thorough background check on a man with his credentials is your failure, not his. Preston sputtered. But the board, the shareholders, they will never accept this. The board, Margaret said coolly, answers to the majority shareholder. That would be the man you just fired on Christmas Eve, in front of witnesses, after physically grabbing him and demanding he remove his clothing. She let the words hang in the air. I suspect the board will have quite a lot to say about your leadership, Mr. Hargrove, but I doubt any of it will be supportive. Admiral Chen moved to stand beside Walter. The Pentagon delegation had gathered behind her, their expressions ranging from shock to something that looked like awe. One of them, a retired Marine colonel with silver eagles on his lapels, stepped forward. Sir, he said, addressing Walter directly, I served in Fallujah. 2004. We used the targeting systems your company developed. There were 37 of us in a convoy that got hit by an ambush. The system you built identified the source of enemy fire in seconds. He paused, his voice thickening. 29 of us made it home because of that technology. Because of you. Another voice from the delegation. I was in Afghanistan in 2010. Same story. Your equipment saved my entire squad. And another. My son is serving right now. He carries gear that your company designed. Every time he calls home safe, I think about the people who made that possible. Walter stood motionless as the testimonials washed over him. His face remained impassive, but something behind his eyes had begun to crack. The wall he had built around himself, the fortress of grief and guilt and self-imposed exile, was being dismantled brick by people he had never met, whose lives he had touched without ever knowing. Margaret watched him carefully. She had seen Walter Crenshaw face down impossible odds, survive situations that would have killed lesser men, build an empire from nothing but determination and the memory of fallen friends. But she had never seen him look quite like this. Vulnerable, exposed, human. Walter, she said gently, it is time to stop hiding. He looked at her, and for a moment, the 71 years showed in every line of his face. The losses, the loneliness, the 6 years of watching from the shadows, punishing himself for surviving when so many others had not. And then something shifted. He straightened, shoulders squaring, chin lifting. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. The ghost was becoming solid again. The man who had built an empire, saved countless lives, and then walked away from it all, was finally allowing himself to be seen. All right, Walter said quietly. His voice carried the weight of everything he had been and everything he had yet to become. All right, no more hiding. The words fell like a benediction into the waiting silence. And somewhere outside, the Christmas Eve snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white, as if the universe itself was offering a fresh start. The decision to stop hiding should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like stepping off a cliff and trusting the air to catch him. Walter stood in the center of the lobby he had walked through thousands of times as a ghost, now fully visible, fully exposed, with nowhere left to retreat. Margaret was organizing documents. Admiral Chen was speaking quietly with her delegation. Preston Hargrove had retreated to the far wall, his face gray, his hands trembling as he typed frantically on his phone. Probably calling lawyers, Walter thought. Probably trying to find some way to salvage the unsalvageable. But Walter was not thinking about Preston anymore. He was thinking about the photograph in his wallet. The one he had almost looked at in the service corridor before Tommy Reeves spoke his call sign. Eleanor on their wedding day. Marcus and Daniel as boys, small enough to fit in his lap, looking up at him like he was the center of the universe. They were men now. Strangers, really. 6 years was a long time. Long enough for Marcus to become a judge, to have children of his own. Long enough for Daniel to build his own company, to get married, to create a life that did not include the father who had abandoned him. Walter had told himself it was for their sake, that his presence would only remind them of what they had lost. That Eleanor's death had broken something in him so fundamentally that he could no longer be the father they deserved. But standing here now, surrounded by people who were looking at him with respect and admiration, He understood the truth he had been hiding from. He had been afraid. Afraid that his sons would look at him and see the same broken man he saw in the mirror. Afraid that they would ask questions he could not answer. Afraid that loving them again would mean risking the kind of loss that had nearly destroyed him when Eleanor died. So he had run, not into battle, where he had always been fearless, into silence, into anonymity, into a security guard uniform that let him pretend he was nobody, that the man who had commanded teams and built empires and held his dying wife's hand no longer existed. Cowardice dressed up as sacrifice. Tommy Reeves appeared at his elbow, his young face still streaked with dried tears. "Sir," he said quietly, "is there anything I can do?" Walter looked at the young ranger, saw himself 50 years ago, eager, idealistic, still believing that courage meant charging forward, not understanding that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones you fought standing still. "How long have you worked here, Tommy?" 14 months, sir." Tommy straightened unconsciously under Walter's gaze. "Got hired through the veteran program. It saved my life, honestly. I was in a bad place after I got out. The transition was harder than I expected, but Meridian gave me a chance. Gave me purpose again." Walter nodded slowly. "Do you know who funds that program?" Tommy hesitated. "I assumed it was corporate, some kind of tax initiative or public relations thing." Walter shook his head. "Eleanor's promise. The foundation I started after my wife died." He paused. "Every veteran hired through that program, every housing placement, every counseling session. It all comes from a promise I made to her, that I would take care of the people who served the way she took care of me." Tommy's eyes widened. "Sir, I had no idea. None of US did. That was the point." Walter's voice was soft. "I did not want credit. I wanted results. I wanted men and women like you to have the chances my brothers never got." He touched his forearm, the coordinates and initials hidden beneath his sleeve. Raymond never got to meet his daughter. Thomas never got to see his hometown again. James never got to tell his mother he loved her one last time. He looked at Tommy. "But you were here. You made it. That matters more than any recognition I could receive." Tommy was silent for a long moment. Then, with the careful precision of someone who understood what the gesture meant, he snapped to attention and saluted. Walter felt something crack in his chest. Not painful, more like ice breaking on a river in spring. He returned the salute, muscle memory carrying him through emotion he had not made in decades. "At ease, son." Tommy relaxed, but his eyes remained bright with emotion. "For what it is worth, sir," he said quietly, "I think your sons would be proud of you. I think anyone would be proud to have a father like you." The words hit Walter like a physical blow. He turned away, ostensibly to watch the snow falling outside the lobby windows, but really to hide the moisture that had gathered in his eyes. Pride. That was the thing he had forfeited when he walked away. The right to be proud of his sons. The right to have them be proud of him. He had given it up willingly, telling himself it was noble, telling himself it was necessary. But standing here now, watching his reflection ghosted in the dark glass, Walter understood that he had been wrong. About all of it. Margaret appeared beside him, her reflection joining his in the window. "The Pentagon delegation wants to proceed with the contract discussion," she said quietly. "They say they will wait until you are ready, but Admiral Chun mentioned there are time-sensitive elements." Walter did not turn. "The contract does not matter right now." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "It is worth $2.3 billion, Walter. I know what it is worth." He finally looked at her, and she saw something in his face that she had not seen in 6 years. Life. The man who had retreated into himself after Eleanor's death was finally, tentatively, reaching back toward the world. "Margaret, I need you to do something for me. Anything." Walter reached into his wallet and withdrew the photograph. Eleanor smiled. His sons' faces, a lifetime captured in a worn piece of paper. "I need you to find my boys," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. "I need to know if they will still talk to me. After everything. After 6 years of silence." He looked at the photograph, then back at Margaret. "I need to know if there is anything left to salvage." Margaret took the photograph gently, handling it like the sacred object it was. "Walter," she said softly, I have been in contact with Marcus and Daniel for the past 4 years. They hired private investigators. They never stopped looking for you. Walter's breath caught. You knew where they were. All this time, I knew, and I honored your request to remain anonymous. She met his eyes, but I also made sure they knew you were alive. I could not let them grieve a father who was still breathing. I am sorry if that was a betrayal, but some things matter more than promises. Walter stared at her. 6 years of believing his sons had moved on. 6 years of convincing himself that his absence was a gift rather than a wound. And all that time, Margaret had been a bridge he never knew existed. They're looking for me? They never stopped. Margaret squeezed his hand. Say the word, Walter. One phone call. That is all it takes. Walter looked at the photograph one more time. Eleanor's eyes seemed to be watching him, waiting to see what he would do. He thought of Raymond's last words. Build something. Make it mean something. He had built Meridian. He had built Eleanor's promise. He had saved lives and changed futures and created things that would outlast him. But he had never rebuilt his family. Make the call, he said. Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her in years. Merry Christmas, Walter, she said quietly. And then she stepped away, phone already in hand, to reconnect a father with the sons he had abandoned. Walter turned back to the window. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the parking lot in white. For the first time in 6 years, he let himself hope. Margaret stepped away with her phone pressed to her ear, and Walter felt the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders like a physical burden. Somewhere on the other end of that call, his sons would learn that their father had been found, that he was alive, that he was ready, finally, to stop running. The lobby had taken on a strange quality, suspended between what had been and what was about to be. Employees still lingered in clusters, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes constantly drifting toward Walter. The Pentagon delegation had moved to a seating area near the windows, Admiral Chun occasionally glancing in his direction with an expression that mixed patience with something like anticipation. And Preston Hargrove remained against the far wall, his phone conversation apparently finished, his face carrying the hollow look of a man watching his future crumble in real time. Walter did not care about Preston. Not anymore. The man was irrelevant, a footnote to a story that had suddenly become much larger than corporate politics and wounded pride. What mattered now was the conversation happening somewhere behind him, the words being exchanged that would determine whether 6 years of silence could ever be forgiven. Sir, Tommy Reeves had not left his side. The young ranger stood at a respectful distance, close enough to be present, far enough to give space. I know it is not my place to ask, but why did you stay? Here, I mean, working as a security guard in a company you built. You could have been anywhere. Walter considered the question. He had asked himself the same thing 1,000 times during early morning shifts and late-night walks through empty corridors. After Eleanor died, he said slowly, I could not stand to be in our house. Every room had her in it. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every shadow in the hallway. I thought I was going to lose my mind. He paused, watching the snow accumulate on the windowsill. But I could not leave everything behind either. This company, these people, this work. It was the only thing I had left that still felt like it mattered. So you stay close, Tommy said. Just not visible. I told myself I was watching over things, making sure the company stayed true to what we built it for. He shook his head. But the truth is simpler than that. I was hiding. From my sons. From my grief. From the man I used to be. He looked at Tommy. This uniform, this job, this anonymity. And let me pretend that Walter Crenshaw Holloway was dead. That there was only Walter the security guard, who had no past, no legacy, no one depending on him. That sounds lonely, sir. It was. Walter's voice was barely above a whisper. It still is. Before Tommy could respond, movement near the entrance caught Walter's attention. Margaret was walking back toward him, her phone now lowered, her expression unreadable. Walter felt his heart rate increase, a physical response he had not experienced since his last combat deployment. Margaret stopped in front of him. Her eyes were bright with something that looked like tears, though her voice remained steady. I spoke with Marcus, she said. He is in Richmond. 3 hours away in good weather, longer with the snow. She paused. He is already in the car. Daniel is driving from Alexandria. They should both be here within 2 hours. Walter's legs felt unsteady. He reached for the security desk to support himself, his hand finding the same surface he had sat behind for 6 years. They're coming here? They would not wait, Margaret said. Marcus said to tell you. She hesitated, and for the first time, her composure cracked slightly. He said to tell you that he has been ready to forgive you since the day you left. He just needed the chance. The words hit Walter like a wave breaking over his head. He had prepared himself for anger, for recrimination, for the justified fury of sons who had been abandoned when they needed their father most. He had not prepared himself for forgiveness. And Daniel, Margaret continued, asked me to tell you that Sarah is pregnant. His wife. They have been trying for 2 years. He paused. He wants you to be there when the baby is born. He wants his child to know their grandfather. Walter could not speak. His throat had closed around a knot of emotion so tight that breathing itself felt like a struggle. He turned away from Margaret, from Tommy, from the watching crowd, and pressed his hand against the cold glass of the window. Outside, the snow fell in thick curtains, transforming the parking lot into a blank canvas. Somewhere out there, on roads made treacherous by winter weather, his sons were driving toward him, toward a reunion that should have happened years ago, toward a father who had failed them in every way that mattered. And they were coming anyway. Admiral Chun approached, her footsteps quiet against the marble. Mr. Holloway, she said gently, I did not mean to intrude on a personal moment, but there is something you should know. Walter did not turn. Yes, Admiral. When I sent that text earlier, asking if Spectre was alive, I was not just curious. She moved to stand beside him, her reflection joining his in the dark glass. I was hoping. There are people in the special operations community who have never forgotten what you did, what you sacrificed. When you disappeared, when we thought you had died, it left a hole. She paused. A lot of young operators grew up hearing stories about you. You gave them something to aspire to. I was just doing my job, Walter said automatically. The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. No, Admiral Chin's voice was firm. You did far more than your job. You carried men out of impossible situations. You built technology that saved lives for decades. You created a foundation that gave veterans like Tommy Reeves a second chance. She turned to face him directly. And you did it all while carrying a weight that would have crushed most people. The losses, the survivor's guilt, the grief. You did not let it stop you from serving others. Walter finally looked at her. Her eyes held no pity, only respect. And something else. Understanding. The kind that came from shared experience, from knowing what it cost to give everything to your country and still feel like it was never enough. I ran away, he said quietly. For my sons. For my life. That is not service. That is cowardice. Admiral Chin shook her head. That is humanity, Mr. Holloway. We break. We make mistakes. We hurt the people we love most. She gestured toward the window, toward the snow and the night and the sons who were driving through it. The question is not whether we fall. The question is whether we get back up. Walter looked at the photograph still clutched in his hand. Eleanor's smile. His boys' faces. A family frozen in time, waiting to see what he would do next. Through the lobby, Margaret's voice carried clearly. Walter, they're asking if there is anything you want them to bring. Anything from the old house. Marcus has a key. Walter's mind went blank for a moment. Then, slowly a thought formed. There was something, one thing he had left behind when he fled. The astronomy book, he said. Eleanor's copy of Cosmos. The one her father gave her when she was 12. He swallowed hard. She used to read it to the boys at night. She taught them the constellations. Margaret nodded, relaying the message. A moment later, she looked up. Marcus says he knows exactly where it is. He says they kept it in the same place. Just in case. Just in case. Just in case their father ever came home. Walter closed his eyes, letting the tears fall freely for the first time in years. Behind him, the lobby watched in respectful silence. Outside, the snow continued to fall. And 2 hours away, getting closer with every passing minute, his sons were driving toward him through the winter night. The next 90 minutes passed in a strange suspension of time. The lobby had transformed into something between a vigil and a celebration. Employees drifting in and out as word spread through phone calls and text messages. The story was already moving beyond the building's walls, rippling outward into a world hungry for tales of hidden heroes and unexpected redemption. Admiral Chun had gathered her delegation in the conference room adjacent to the lobby, the contract discussions proceeding with a new energy now that the mysterious majority shareholder had a face and a history. Margaret shuttled between the conference room and Walter's position by the window, relaying updates on terms and provisions that would normally have required his full attention. But Walter could not focus on business. His eyes kept drifting to the main entrance, to the snow-covered drive beyond the glass doors, to the headlights of every car that passed. Tommy Reeves had appointed himself an unofficial guardian, fielding questions from curious employees, turning away reporters who had somehow already caught wind of the story, and making sure Walter had coffee that kept going cold in his hands. Preston Hargrove had disappeared somewhere in the first hour. Walter had not seen him leave and did not particularly care where he had gone. The man's fate was sealed. The board would handle the formal termination. The lawyers would handle the potential lawsuits. Walter had no interest in revenge, only in surviving the next 2 hours until his sons arrived. "Sir," Tommy said, appearing at his elbow with a fresh cup of coffee. "There is someone here who wants to speak with you." He paused, something uncertain in his expression. One of the cleaning staff, Maria Gonzalez. She says she has worked the night shift for 11 years. Walter turned. A small woman in her late 50s stood at the edge of the lobby, her cleaning cart beside her, her hands twisting nervously in front of her uniform. Her dark eyes were bright with emotion. "Maria," Walter's voice softened. "Of course. Send her over." Tommy gestured, and Maria approached slowly, as if afraid she might be intruding. When she reached Walter, she stopped and looked up at him with an expression that made his chest tighten. "Mr. Walter," she said, her accent lending music to his name. "For 11 years, you say good morning to me. Every day, 5:15, when I'm mopping the lobby, you come through those doors and you say, 'Good morning, Maria. How is your family?'" She paused, her voice thickening. "Nobody else asks. The executives, they walk past like I am furniture. But you always ask." Walter remembered. Every morning, stopping at her cart, listening to updates about her daughter's education, her son's new job, her husband's recovery from heart surgery. Small moments he had never thought much about, kindness that cost him nothing. "I remember," he said. "Your daughter graduated last spring. Nursing degree. You showed me the photograph." Maria nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She is working at Georgetown now, because of the scholarship." She looked at him with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time. "I did not know that scholarship came from your foundation until tonight. I did not know you were the one who built all of this." She gestured at the lobby around them. "But I knew you were a good man. I always knew." She reached out and took his hand, holding it between both of hers. "God bless you, Mr. Walter. Merry Christmas." Walter could not speak. He simply nodded, squeezing her hands gently before she released him and returned to her cart, wiping her eyes with the corner of her uniform. Tommy watched her go, then turned to Walter. "How many people have you helped without them knowing?" Walter shook his head. "I never kept count. That was not the point." Then what was the point? Walter thought about Raymond, about Eleanor, about the 17 names on the memorial wall upstairs. "My best friend asked me to make it mean something," he said finally. "All the loss, all the sacrifice. He asked me to build something that mattered." He looked at Tommy. "Every veteran we house, every scholarship we fund, every person like Maria whose life gets a little easier. That is what makes it mean something. Not recognition, not gratitude, just knowing that the people I lost did not die for nothing." Before Tommy could respond, the lobby doors opened with a rush of cold air. Walter's head snapped toward the entrance, his heart hammering, but it was not his son's. It was a news crew. A woman with perfectly styled hair and a microphone strode through the doors, followed by a cameraman already recording. "Mr. Holloway," she called out, her voice carrying across the marble. "Jessica Brennan, Channel 4 News." We have received reports of an extraordinary story unfolding here tonight. A decorated war hero, believed dead for decades, discovered working as a security guard in the company he founded. Would you care to comment? Tommy stepped forward, positioning himself between Walter and the camera. This is private property. You need to leave. The public has a right to know. The reporter pressed, trying to angle around him. Mr. Holloway, is it true you won the Navy Cross? Is it true you have been living anonymously for 6 years? What made you decide to reveal yourself tonight? Walter felt the old instincts rise up, the desire to disappear, to deflect, to let the shadows swallow him again. But something had shifted in the past few hours. The man who had hidden for 6 years was tired of hiding. He stepped around Tommy, facing the camera directly. His voice, when it came, was steady. I did not decide to reveal myself, he said. Someone else made that decision for me. He paused, letting the words settle. But I will tell you this. Every day, in this country, there are veterans who are invisible. Men and women who served, who sacrificed, who came home broken in ways that do not show on the surface. They work jobs that no one notices. They struggle with wounds that no one sees. And most of them never get a moment like this. Most of them stay invisible until the day they die. The reporter's aggressive posture had softened slightly. She lowered her microphone, listening. If there is a story here, Walter continued, it is not about me. It is about them. The ones who serve and then get forgotten. The ones who need help but are too proud to ask for it. The ones who build things and then walk away because they do not think they deserve recognition. He straightened, and for a moment, the decorated warrior was fully visible beneath the worn security uniform. If you want to tell a story tonight, tell that one. Tell the story of the invisible heroes. Because there are a lot more of them than people realize. The lobby had gone silent. Even the camera seemed to be holding its breath. And then, through the glass doors, Walter saw headlights turning into the parking lot. 2 cars, one behind the other, pulling into spaces near the entrance. His heart stopped. The doors of the first car opened. A man stepped out, tall, dark-haired, wearing a coat hastily thrown over what looked like pajamas. He was holding something in his hands, a book with a worn cover. And behind him, from the second car, another man emerged. Younger, with Eleanor's eyes. Marcus. Daniel. His sons had arrived. The world narrowed to those 2 figures walking through the snow. Marcus, 38 years old now, a judge who had inherited Walter's jaw and his mother's determination. Daniel, 35, an engineer with Eleanor's eyes and her gentle way of moving through the world. They walked side by side toward the lobby doors, snow gathering on their shoulders, their breath visible in the cold December air. Walter could not move. His legs had locked in place, his body frozen between the desperate need to run toward them and the paralyzing fear of what he would see in their faces when they reached him. 6 years. 6 years of silence. 6 years of unanswered phone calls and unopened letters, and a father who had vanished when they needed him most. Why did he have to expect anything but anger? The doors opened. Cold air swept into the lobby. And then Marcus and Daniel were standing 10 feet away, their eyes finding their father across the marble expanse. For a moment, no one spoke. The news crew, the employees, the Pentagon delegation, even Admiral Chun, all faded into insignificance. There were only 3 people in the world now, separated by a decade of grief and a gulf of unspoken words. Marcus moved first. He crossed the distance in 4 strides, the astronomy book still clutched in his hands, and stopped directly in front of Walter. His eyes were red, his cheeks wet with tears that had nothing to do with the cold. He looked at his father with an expression that held everything: the anger, the confusion, the years of wondering, and beneath it all, something that looked impossibly like love. 6 years, Marcus said. His voice cracked on the words. 6 years, Dad. We thought you were dead. We thought we had lost both of you. Walter opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The words he had rehearsed, the apologies he had constructed in the lonely hours of his security shifts, all of them dissolved before the reality of his son standing in front of him. "I'll look for you," Marcus continued. "Every database, every shelter, every morgue in 3 states. I used every resource I had as a prosecutor and then as a judge. I called in favors. I hired investigators. He paused, his voice breaking. And you were here. The whole time. You were right here. Daniel had reached them now, standing beside his brother. His face held the same mixture of emotions. But where Marcus's grief had turned to words, Daniel's had turned to silence. He simply stood, watching, waiting. I know, Walter finally managed. His voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. I know. There is nothing I can say that will make it right. Nothing I could do to give you back those years. He looked at both of them, his sons, the men they had become without him. I was broken. After your mother died, something inside me shattered. I did not know how to put it back together. He swallowed hard. I told myself I was protecting you, that my presence would only remind you of what we lost, that you were better off without a father who could not function. Marcus shook his head. We were never better off without you. We were just lost, both of us, trying to figure out how to grieve Mom while also grieving you. He held up the astronomy book, the worn cover catching the light. We kept everything, Dad. Everything. The house is exactly the way you left it. Her clothes are still in the closet. Her books are still on the shelves. We could not let go of her, and we could not let go of you. Walter's hand trembled as he reached out to touch the book. Eleanor's copy of Cosmos. The one her father had given her when she was 12. The one she had read to the boys at night, teaching them the names of stars, the distances between galaxies, the beautiful insignificance of human beings against the vastness of space. She would be so angry at me, Walter whispered, for running, for leaving you. Daniel spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but steady. She would be angry, but she would also forgive you. He stepped closer, close enough that Walter could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the same flecks Eleanor had carried. That is what she did. That is who she was. And that is who we are trying to be. The words broke something open in Walter's chest. A dam that had held back 6 years of grief and guilt and desperate longing finally gave way. He reached out, one hand finding Marcus's shoulder, the other finding Daniel's, and pulled his sons toward him. The embrace was clumsy at first. 3 men who had forgotten how to hold each other, their bodies stiff with years of separation. But then Marcus's arms tightened around his father's back, and Daniel pressed his face into Walter's shoulder, and suddenly they were clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, holding on as if letting go might mean drowning. I am sorry, Walter said, the words muffled against his son's coats. I am so sorry. I should have stayed. I should have fought harder. I should have been there. You are here now, Marcus said. That is what matters. They stood like that for a long moment, the lobby watching in respectful silence. The news camera was still recording, but Jessica Brennan had lowered her microphone, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Tommy Reeves had turned away, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Even Admiral Chun, who had commanded warships and made decisions that affected thousands of lives, stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her composure softened by the scene unfolding before her. Finally, Walter pulled back, holding his sons at arm's length, drinking in their faces. You are both so grown, he said, a broken laugh escaping him. Marcus, you look just like your grandfather. And Daniel, your mother's eyes. He touched Daniel's face, tracing the familiar features. God, you have your mother's eyes. Daniel smiled, the expression transforming his face. Sarah wanted to come, he said, but the doctor said no travel this late in the pregnancy. She is waiting at home. She said to tell you that the nursery is ready, and there is a rocking chair next to the crib. She said you're going to need it. Walter's breath caught. The baby, his grandchild, another chance at the family he had abandoned. We have so much to tell you, Marcus said. He pulled back, keeping one hand on his father's arm, as if afraid Walter might disappear again. Anna is 7 now. She has been asking about her grandfather for years. We showed her pictures. We told her stories. He paused, his voice thick. She made you a Christmas card. It is in the car. And Thomas is 4, Daniel added. We named him after Mom's father. He has our laugh, Dad. The same laugh. Walter closed his eyes, overwhelmed. 2 grandchildren he had never met. A third on the way. Years of moments he had missed, birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. The weight of everything he had lost pressed down on him, threatening to crush him. But beneath that weight, something else was rising, something that felt almost like hope. "I want to meet them," he said. "All of them. I want to know everything I missed." He opened his eyes, looking at his sons with a fierce intensity. "And I want to spend whatever time I have left making up for the years I was gone." Marcus and Daniel exchanged a glance. Something passed between them, a communication born of shared grief and shared hope. "Then come home," Marcus said simply. "It is Christmas Eve, Dad. Come home." The word hit Walter like a physical force. Home, a place he had not allowed himself to imagine for 6 years. A place that had existed only in memory, frozen in time, waiting for his return. He looked around the lobby one last time. The company he had built, the employees he had watched over from the shadows, the life he had constructed from anonymity and penance. Then he looked at his sons, at the book in Marcus's hands, at the snow falling softly outside the windows. "Yes," he said. The word came out as a whisper, but it carried the weight of a promise. "Let's go home." Before Walter could move toward the door, Margaret Sullivan stepped forward. Her face held a mixture of warmth and professional resolve that Walter recognized from decades of working together. "Walter," she said gently, "before you go, there are a few matters that need your attention." She glanced at the conference room where Admiral Chun and the Pentagon delegation waited. The contract and the matter of Mr. Hargrove. Walter looked at his sons, then back at Margaret. His instinct was to walk out the door and never look back, to let lawyers and boards handle the wreckage Preston Hargrove had created. But he had spent 6 years avoiding responsibility for his own life. He would not avoid responsibility for his company. "Give me 10 minutes, he said to Marcus and Daniel. "Then we go home." His sons nodded, understanding in their eyes. They had waited 6 years. They could wait 10 more minutes. Walter followed Margaret toward the conference room, aware of every eye in the lobby, tracking his movement. Tommy Reeves fell in a step beside him, an unconscious honor guard. When they reached the conference room doors, Admiral Chun emerged to meet them. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "we can delay the contract discussion until after the holiday." Given the circumstances, no one would question a postponement. Walter shook his head. "You have been here for hours on Christmas Eve. Your people have families to get home to. Let's finish this now." He entered the conference room with Margaret at his side. The Pentagon delegation sat around the polished table, their faces a mixture of respect and barely concealed curiosity. These were men and women who had spent their careers in military service, who understood sacrifice and duty in ways most civilians never would. They looked at Walter not as a CEO or a reclusive billionaire, but as one of their own. The contract documentation was spread across the table. Margaret had clearly been preparing for this moment, organizing everything Walter would need to review. But before she could begin her summary, Walter held up his hand. "Before we discuss terms," he said, "I need to address something." He looked around the table, meeting each set of eyes in turn. This company was built by veterans for veterans. Every patent we hold, every system we have developed, exists because men and women in uniform needed better tools to come home alive. He paused. That mission does not change based on who sits in the corner office. It does not change based on quarterly profits or shareholder expectations. If this contract moves forward, it moves forward with that understanding. Admiral Chun nodded slowly. "That is exactly why we wanted to work with Meridian, Mr. Holloway. Your reputation precedes you. Even when we did not know your face, we knew your values." Walter signed the contract in 3 places, his signature appearing on official documents for the first time in 6 years. The pen felt strange in his hand, heavy with the weight of returning to a world he had tried to leave behind. When the final signature was complete, Admiral Chun stood and extended her hand. "On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command and the United States Navy, thank you." She paused, her voice softening. "And welcome back, Master Chief. It is an honor to finally meet the legend." Walter shook her hand. "The honor is mine, Admiral." As the delegation gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Margaret touched Walter's arm. "There is still the matter of Preston Hargrove," she said quietly. "The board is already convening an emergency session by phone. They want guidance on how to proceed." Walter considered the question. He thought about the humiliation in the lobby, the cruel words, the hands grabbing his arm. He thought about the years of anonymity, the security guard uniform, the early morning shifts and late-night walks through empty corridors. Preston Hargrove had tried to destroy a man he thought was powerless. That said everything about who he was. But Walter had seen too much destruction in his life. He had watched friends die, cities burn, families shatter. He had no appetite for more. "Terminate his employment," Walter said. "Effective immediately. No severance. No recommendation. No golden parachute." He paused. But no public humiliation either. No press releases about his conduct. Let him leave quietly and figure out his own path forward. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That is more generous than he deserves." "Probably," Walter agreed. "But I have spent 6 years hiding from the world because I was ashamed of who I had become." He thought of Eleanor, of her endless capacity for forgiveness. "I will not add to the shame in someone else's life, even if he earned it. Let him carry his own consequences. That will be punishment enough." Margaret nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Eleanor would approve. Walter felt the familiar ache at the sound of his wife's name. She would, he agreed quietly. She always believed people could change. He walked back into the lobby, where Marcus and Daniel waited by the Christmas tree. The news crew had finally left, though Walter suspected the story would be everywhere by morning. Tommy Reeves stood nearby, still watching over the scene like a guardian who had not yet received permission to stand down. "Tommy," Walter said, approaching the young ranger, "I want you to know something." Tommy straightened. "Yes, sir?" "The veteran hiring program, the scholarships, the housing assistance." Walter looked at him steadily. "I need someone to oversee it. Someone who understands what our veterans go through. Someone who has been there." He paused. "I am asking if you would consider taking that position." Tommy's eyes widened. "Sir, I'm just a security guard. I do not have the qualifications for something like that." Walter smiled, the expression unfamiliar on his face. "I was just a security guard, too. Look how that turned out." He put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Think about it. Talk to your family. The offer stands whenever you are ready." He turned to his sons, who were watching with expressions of quiet pride. They had seen their father in many roles over the years: decorated warrior, successful businessman, grieving husband, absent father. But this might have been the first time they had seen him as simply a good man, try to do right by the people around him. "Ready?" Marcus asked. Walter took one last look around the lobby. The marble floors he had walked for 6 years. The security desk where he had sat through countless shifts. The Christmas tree glittering with lights that seemed brighter now than they had an hour ago. He thought of Raymond, who had asked him to build something meaningful. He thought of Eleanor, who had asked him not to disappear. He thought of the 17 names on the memorial wall upstairs, the brothers who would never get a second chance at life. He had been given that chance. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything he deserved, he had been given another opportunity to be the man his family needed. He would not waste it. "Yes," he said, moving toward his sons. "I am ready." They walked out together into the snow and the cold and the Christmas Eve night. The doors closed behind them, sealing off the lobby and everything it represented. Ahead of them, 2 cars waited with engines running, headlights cutting through the falling snow. Marcus handed Walter the astronomy book. Eleanor's copy of Cosmos, worn soft by decades of love and use. Walter held it against his chest, feeling the weight of memory, the presence of the woman who had been his anchor for 34 years. "She would have liked this," Daniel said quietly. "You coming home on Christmas Eve. She always said Christmas was for miracles." Walter looked up at the sky. The snow had thinned enough that a few stars were visible through the clouds, distant points of light that Eleanor had taught their sons to name. "Maybe she sent one," he said. "One last miracle from wherever she is." His sons did not respond. They did not need to. Some things existed beyond words, beyond logic, beyond the limitations of what the world said was possible. They got into the cars and drove away through the snow, toward home, toward family, toward a future that Walter had stopped believing in 6 years ago. And somewhere, in whatever place the dead go to watch over the living, Eleanor Holloway smiled. Christmas morning arrived with pale winter sunlight streaming through windows Walter had not seen in 6 years. He woke in the guest room of Marcus's house, disoriented for a moment, his body expecting the narrow cot of his rented room near the Meridian facility. Instead, he found himself wrapped in clean sheets that smelled like lavender, surrounded by walls covered with family photographs he had never seen. The sounds of children reached him from downstairs. Laughter, running feet, the excited shrieks of Christmas morning discovery. Walter lay still, listening, letting the sounds wash over him like water over parched earth. A soft knock came at the door. Daniel's voice, quiet and careful. "Dad, are you awake? The kids are asking about you." Walter sat up slowly, his body protesting the movement with the familiar aches of 71 years. "I will be down in a minute," he called back. He dressed in clothes Marcus had lent him, a sweater that was slightly too large and slacks that were slightly too short. His security uniform was gone, left behind in the lobby of the building he had built. He would never wear it again. The stairs creaked beneath his weight as he descended. The house opened up before him, a home filled with the evidence of lives being lived. Toys scattered across the floor, coffee cups on the kitchen counter, a Christmas tree surrounded by torn wrapping paper. And in the middle of it all, two small faces turned toward him with identical expressions of wonder. Anna, 7 years old, had her mother's blonde hair and her grandfather's serious eyes. She stood frozen near the tree, a new doll clutched in her hands, staring at Walter like he was a figure from fairy tale who had suddenly stepped into reality. Thomas, 4 years old, had no such hesitation. He ran across the room with the fearless momentum of early childhood and wrapped his arms around Walter's legs. "Grandpa," he announced loudly. "Santa came. He brought presents." Walter's throat closed around a knot of emotion. He knelt slowly, bringing himself to Thomas's level, and looked into the face of a child who carried Eleanor's laugh and her father's name. "I see that," he managed. "Did you get everything you wanted?" Thomas nodded vigorously. "I got trucks and a dinosaur. And Daddy said you were coming home, and that was the best present." He tilted his head, studying Walter's face with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Why do you have lines on your face, Grandpa?" "Because I'm very old," Walter said, a broken laugh escaping him. "And because I have seen a lot of things." Anna had approached slowly during this exchange, her initial shyness giving way to curiosity. She stopped a few feet away, still clutching her doll, her expression thoughtful. "Mom said you were a soldier," she said. "She said you saved people." Walter looked at his granddaughter, at the serious eyes that reminded him so much of himself at that age. "I tried," he said. "Sometimes I succeeded. Sometimes I did not." Anna considered this. Then she stepped forward and put her small hand on his arm, right over the place where his tattoo lay hidden beneath the borrowed sweater. "I'm glad you came home," she said simply. The words, delivered with the uncomplicated honesty of childhood, broke something open in Walter's chest. He pulled both children into an embrace, holding them close, breathing in the scent of shampoo and Christmas morning excitement and the indefinable sweetness of family. Marcus and Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway, their wives beside them. Sarah, Daniel's wife, stood with one hand resting on her pregnant belly, tears streaming silently down her face. Marcus's wife, Jennifer, leaned into her husband's shoulder, her expression soft with emotion. "This is what you missed," Marcus said quietly. 6 years of this." He did not say it with accusation, only with the weight of truth. "I know," Walter said, his voice muffled against his grandchildren's hair. "I know." The rest of the day passed in a blur of warmth and chaos. Walter sat on the floor and helped Thomas build a tower with new blocks. He read to Anna from the astronomy book, Eleanor's book, showing her the same constellations her grandmother had shown her father decades ago. He ate Christmas dinner at a table surrounded by family, The empty chair where Eleanor should have sat filled instead with her memory, her presence woven through every conversation and every laugh. After dinner, when the children had been put to bed and the adults sat in the living room with glasses of wine, Daniel cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, "Sarah and I have been talking. We want you to move in with us. There's a room above the garage. It has its own entrance, its own bathroom. You would have privacy, but you would also be close." He paused, close to the baby, close to us. Walter looked at his younger son, at the hope in his eyes, at the fear that his father might refuse. "I've been thinking," Walter said slowly, "about what comes next." He turned the wine glass in his hands, watching the light play through the liquid. "For 6 years, I punished myself for surviving, for losing your mother, for not being strong enough to stay." He looked up, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room. "I do not want to punish myself anymore, and I do not want to waste whatever time I have left." He set down the wine glass. "I will move in with you and Sarah. I will be there when the baby is born. I will learn the names of all the dinosaurs Thomas loves and help Anna with her homework." He paused, his voice thickening. "And I will tell them about their grandmother, about Raymond, about all the people who sacrificed so that I could be here today." Marcus reached over and gripped his father's hand. "That is all we ever wanted, Dad. Just you, present, alive, here." The word echoed in Walter's mind. Here. Such a simple concept, such a difficult thing to achieve. But he had achieved it. Against all odds, against all the walls he had built, against 6 years of running, he was finally here. Later that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Walter stood alone by the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard. The stars were visible now, the clouds having cleared to reveal a Christmas sky brilliant with distant light. He thought of Raymond, whose dying words had set him on a path that led to this moment. Build something. Make it mean something. He thought of Eleanor, whose love had anchored him through the darkest years of his life. Do not disappear, Walter. He thought of the 17 names on the memorial wall, the brothers who would never stand at a window on Christmas night, surrounded by family, grateful for second chances. Still here, he whispered to the stars. Still here, still trying. But for the first time in 30 years, the words were not an apology. They were not a plea for forgiveness or a desperate attempt to justify his survival. They were a promise to Raymond, to Eleanor, to his sons, to the grandchildren sleeping upstairs. A promise to himself. He would live whatever years remained, not in hiding, not in penance, not in the shadows of his own grief. He would live in the light, surrounded by the people who loved him, doing the work that still mattered. And when his time finally came, when he joined Eleanor and Raymond and all the others who had gone before, he would go knowing that he had kept his promises, that he had built something meaningful, that he had made it count. The stars glittered overhead, the same stars Eleanor had taught him to love, the same stars he would teach his grandchildren to find. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that heroes walk among us in forms we do not always recognize, please consider subscribing and share with us in the comments. Who is the quiet hero in your life? Who is the person whose sacrifices go unnoticed, whose struggles remain invisible, whose dignity perseveres despite everything the world throws at them? Because stories like this one are not just entertainment. They are reminders. Reminders that every person we pass has a history we cannot see. That kindness costs nothing and changes everything. That it is never too late to come home. Walter Crenshaw Holloway, call sign Spectre, stood at the window until the first light of dawn began to color the eastern sky. Then he turned away from the stars and walked toward the kitchen, where he would make coffee for his family and begin the first day of the rest of his life. Still here, he said one more time, to no one and everyone. And finally, after everything, he meant it as a beginning.